Let's take a look at another chart which shows working age populations, 15 to 64 years of age for different countries. In comparison with China, we have India and China above, and then below, first of all, is US on blue, Indonesia in purple, Philippines in light blue, and Japan in pink. So, Professor Chien, if we could show that map again, the chart, I mean, how critical can we say China's population challenges are? Is it a crisis?
Mm-hmm. Well, looking at this graph, the problem is, are those working age population are able to find jobs? Given that in the post-COVID area, looking for a job for the young generation is becoming a nightmare. The unemployment rate for the young reached 13, even higher in July, 17%. So I think the problem is not only the shrinking of those population, it is the working age people, are they able to find jobs now? And then another perspective to fix this population crisis of China, because in other part of the country...
So you do think it's a crisis?
I do think that in the long-term future, it will be a crisis. So it's up to the government to really think of an alternative strategy to treat this crisis into an opportunity. For the other countries, giving birth is only one way of increasing population. Promoting migration is another way, especially promoting skillful and talented migrations. But that would be very challenging for China's society because China wants to emphasize its social stability. Opening up the Chinese society to more global migration might be a problem because it cannot control the ideology. So it might be up to China's government and authority to think of how smart they can craft this and then integrate it with the birth rate problem now.
I mean, the only solution, Professor Chen, is migration if you have a low fertility rates.
Yeah, among many, but I think this is most effective way. But many countries, even in Europe, they have a very strong political current against the immigration. But from a demographic point of view, I think that is a way to solve this problem effectively and immediately.
Right, yeah, because I mean, extending retirement or pushing back retirement ages would only work to a certain extent, right? So Xi Jinping often quotes the 1.4 billion Chinese people either in his own wishes toward taking Taiwan or his displeasure at other nations, such as the US. In a speech to mark 100 years of the CCP in July 2021, he said any attempts to subjugate China would result in, I quote, heads bashed bloody against a great wall of steel forged by over 1.4 billion Chinese people. So let's take a look at our chart again. And in particular, let's have a look at Indonesia and the Philippines. These are all claimants in the South China Sea. They also have growing military links with the United States and India. What does it mean for these countries' current asymmetric balance, Professor Chen, with China? I mean, at the moment, there is a huge difference, but in the future, that will not continue to be the case.
But even combined, I don't see that a Southeast Asian country can compare with the size of Chinese population. They are huge, massive. The largest country in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, that is a little bit more than.
But if we see the chart, I think it extends to 2100, which is the end of the century.
Yes, but that's the end. That's a projection. We don't know whether they urbanize. And then getting rich, they are still. Admittedly, that Islam is a pro fertility culture, so they have the potential, but we don't know. But because you base upon a lot of assumption. Because like during the late 70s, China also built its fertility policy upon a projection. So I think we got to be very careful about this. So for the time being, yes, we do see a lot of potential in the Southeast Asian countries, especially in the as a production force, They are sort of receiving a lot of factory that are moving away from China. So that is quite optimistic. But whether this trend will continue till the end of the century, I think there's a lot of uncertainty.
Now, in 2012, political scientist Graham Allison coined the term the Thucydides trap for US-China competition. Allison used the term to describe a tendency towards war when a rising power, exemplified by Athens in his example, challenges the status of a ruling power, exemplified by Sparta. These were the ruling cities in Greece, ancient Greece. Allison explored the term further in his 2017 book, Destined for War, in which he argued that China and the US are currently on a collision course for war. Allison studied 16 cases of great power rivalry, and in 12 of them over the past 500 years, the result was, in fact, war. Professor Chien, let me come to you. So if we look at the US and China, we could say that perhaps over the past 3 decades, you have the US as the ruling power, that's Sparta, and China as the rising power, which is Athens. Now, we've been accustomed to think that for China, time is on its side, but if that rising power believes that it is about to decline, perhaps because of population drop, what course would it take? Would it be the one to trigger war? Like some analysts, such as Hal Brands, believes that China's aging and shrinking population would trigger that course toward war. How do you read it, Professor Chien? Would it trigger it, or is it more likely to decrease the chances of war?
I think we cannot predict international relation or interstate warfare in a vacuum, meaning out of the context. In the ancient time, in the time of the Sparta and Athens, there is no globalization or division of the labor in the world market. And then so Sparta did not heavily dependent on Athens to provide essential daily goods. If we look at the US and China, we cannot forget that US still imports 400 to 500 billions of goods every year from China.
Trade is actually
increasing. Yes, trade is actually increasing. And also US need Chinese goods, while the US also export to China around 100 to 150 billion. So this trade deficit also bind these two countries together, even though we often talk about how they compete, but we should not forget that they are also closely interdependent on each other's.
But that's why the US is trying to de-risk, isn't it? It's trying to reduce the dependency.
Right.
Is your point that it cannot do that?
It's very difficult because it will make things made in USA very expensive that the everyday people, the everyday American, they cannot afford. If you go to Walmart, it's all made in China goods. It's very difficult. Maybe you can probably have some high-end goods manufactured in the US, but it's very difficult to move away from that, especially what the daily people need. So this strong dependency will make war very unlikely, I think. Yes, they will compete. And I think the solution is for US and China to find its place in the world, either economically or militarily. They should not provoke each other.
Professor Chen, I'd like to get your view. Do you think that if China thinks that its population is dropping, does it think that the window for aggression is closing?
It's very difficult to tell, as Professor Chien just mentioned. War depends upon a lot of factors, and the internal social structures is one among a lot of things. I know the argument comes from the so-called peak power trap. It's describing the Germany before World War I and Japan before World War II, when the industrialization and the population reach a certain peak, and they sense that they are going to decline from there, so they want to have a preventative strike first. We don't know whether the history will repeat themselves, but it's, as people mentioned, certainly it rhymes. So there is some danger there. But there is also other factor have to consider, including the difficulty of launching a modern time war, and whether China, we see China as, at the peak, the whole population getting older, they sort of feel less aggressive. Especially as experience a COVID, experience the dictatorship, lockdown. I think many people are just getting tired.
Do you think there's also a fear that, if we saw that the working age, which we could say that's a proxy for the military age, which is 15 to 45 men, if you wiped out a considerable proportion of those men fighting, then that would exacerbate the problems.
But never underestimate dictator. They for their survival, they will do a lot of things. Wipe out a whole generation is never a really concern for China. Don't forget about the Great Leap Forward in the late 50s. It almost wiped out a huge 10% or more than 10% of population at that time. The dictator doesn't really care about that. The most important thing is survival.